In 1970, Pere Portabella asked Jesus Franco to let him film behind the scenes of the film he was shooting, Count Dracula. The result of that experiment was the film Cuadecuc.Vampir that was released in 1970. Cuadecuc.Vampir has been described as a vampirization of Franco's Count Dracula. As Carroll put it, the true vampire in Cuadecuc.Vampir is Portabella, who with his camera sucks, so to speak, the blood of Count Dracula by Jess Franco. Hoberman would call the result among one of the most highly regarded avant-garde films of the past half-century. During the film, Portabella reveals what the film sets are really like, how the crew working on the film are preparing the film sets, how they create spiders' webs, and how they make up the characters or help them get inside the coffins. Also, he shows the actors on their breaks, as well as them interacting with Portabella's camera. Cuadecuc.Vampir is what Marsh calls a remarkable example of meta-cinema. In fact, this movie was released in the United States with the name of How Vampire Movies Are Made. That says a lot about what the film is really like, an early behind-the-scenes film. On the other hand, Del Tel and Garcia explain that Cuadecuc.Vampir is not a making-of, but actually a completely different work, because what it does is use a filmed work to create another completely new one. In my opinion, one of the most surprising and pleasant things to watch is when you put the two films in parallel, to contemplate how they relate to each other, and how in some sequences, the edit is almost identical or with the same meaning. Let's enjoy a comparison of the two films.
Are you the English?
Jonathan Harker.
We have strict orders from the Count to look after you.
Keep in mind that you're hearing the audio of the two films simultaneously. In Cuadecuc.Vampir, the soundtrack was created by the experimental musician Carlos Santos and is made just with noises, sound effects and music, without dialogues. Notice how it also enriches Franco's film by magically reinforcing it.
We have a right to be proud, but in us flows the blood of many brave races. The blood of Attila is in these veins. To us was entrusted for centuries the guarding of our lands.
There's not much deep analysis here, but play the game with me. It is a contemplative one. Just imagine two different crews filming the same takes. All the images are captured, making their respective journey from camera to screen. How two different directors are cutting the film in some sequences with just a few differences. And finally, when you put them together, it creates another meaning. One complements the other. They enhance each other. In other parts, the edits differ on the cutting but converge on the meaning. Look at this sequence side by side and you see what I'm talking about. In Count Dracula on the left screen, young solicitor Jonathan Harker wakes up in his room and discovers that he was bitten. So he leaves the room through a window and goes to investigate Dracula's castle until he finds a coffin with Dracula sleeping in it. But in the Cuadecuc.Vampir sequence, Jonathan wakes up in his room, discovers that he was bitten. Then we see how Portabella's team is preparing the coffin with Christopher Lee in it. We then go back to the solicitor's investigation and his finding of the coffin, and finally how he goes back to the room through the window. Later, the films take different paths. On the one hand, Count Dracula of Jesus Franco, who takes the path of the narrative, introduces the character of Renfield in the asylum, who's played by Klaus Kinski. But Portavella doesn't make use of this character and leads his narration, or better said, his non-narration, towards other paths. Although Portavella makes a deconstruction of Franco's film, there's still a narrative concern that he focuses on, basically 3 points. These are the contact of the young lawyer with Dracula, the transfer of Dracula to civilization, and his death described by Lee, which we will see later. Thus, watching Cuadecuc.Vampir, one can follow the narration of the classic Dracula film and at the same time of its destruction, as well as the destruction of cinema, since its most basic aspects are revealed. If we put the end of the two films side by side, we realize how one contradicts the other. In one, we see Christopher Lee reading the death of Dracula in Bram Stoker's book, while simultaneously seeing the version of Jesus Franco in which Dracula is condemned and killed, following the logic of a linear narrative, murdered in the end. Whereas in the version of Portavella, it is the director who destroys the myth of Dracula, revealing to us the actor before the character. Moreover, Portavella's Cuadecuc.Vampir offers an alternative ending. It reconstructs the end of the Dracula story with a different version. As Del Tell and Garcia say, in Cuadecuc.Vampir, the social punishment towards Dracula is not accepted, even though he was a cruel vampire. On the contrary, Jess Franco promoted the film as the most faithful version of Bram Stoker's novel, a fact that raised much criticism both among lovers of the written classic and fans of director Jess Franco.
They're both carrying great big knives. One is carrying a Bowie knife, of course, named after Colonel James Bowie of the United States, and the other is carrying a kukri knife, which is the knife of the Gurkhas, the famous Nepali troops. Now, they jumped onto the top of the wagon, they wrenched off the top of the box in which Dracula is lying, and this is the description. I saw the Count lying within the box upon the earth, some of which the rood falling from the cart had scattered over him. He was deathly pale, just like a waxen image, and the red eyes glared with a horrible vindictive look which I knew too well. As I looked, the eyes saw the sinking sun, and the look of hate in them turned to triumph. But on the instant came the sweep and the flash of Jonathan's great knife. I shrieked as I saw it shear through the throat, whilst at the same moment Mr. Morris's Bowie knife plunged into the heart. It was like a miracle. Before our very eyes, and almost in the drawing of a breath, the whole body crumbled into dust and passed from our sight. I shall be glad, and as long as I live, and even in that moment of final dissolution, there was in that face a look of peace, such as I never could have imagined would have rested there.
Finally, what Cuadecuc.Vampir has generated is the demystification of Dracula. By removing the mask, the fiction is revealed, and therefore the fear of the character is taken away. Dracula no longer scares us because we understand that he has ceased to exist without having to execute him.